A sinister cave in Jerusalem hills may have been the setting for dark necromantic rituals where a local oracle used human skulls to commune with the dead to determine the future. That is the conclusion of a new paper published by Cambridge University Press and authored by Eitan Klein and Boaz Zissou. The site, known as Teomim Cave, was found to be littered with human skulls, oil lamps and other artifacts linked with dark sorcery, and was described by experts as a possible portal to the underworld. The paper, called Oil Lamps, Spearheads and Skulls, Possible Evidence of Necromancy During Late Antiquity at the Teomim Cave, Judean Hills, suggested that the cave may have been the nexus of ancient rites involving necromancy and communication with the dead, mainly by witches. The paper read, "The Teomim Cave is a large karst cave located in the Jerusalem hills. Since 2009, the cave has been explored by our team as a joint project of the Martin Zuz Department of Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology at Bar Ilan University and the Cave Research Center at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Over 120 intact oil lamps were collected in the 2010 to 2016 survey seasons from all sections of the cave. Most of them were dated to the 2nd to 4th centuries CE. All of these lamps had been deliberately inserted in narrow, deep crevices in the main chamber walls or beneath the rubble. Some crevices contained groups of oil lamps mixed with weapons and pottery vessels from earlier periods or placed with human skulls." This article discusses the possibility that the oil lamps, weapons, human skulls and other artifacts were used as part of necromancy ceremonies that took place in the cave during the late Roman period, and that the cave may have served as a local oracle, Necromantion. The crevice is a large, complex cave on the western edge of the Jerusalem hills. It was named Mugeret et Tuimen, the Cave of the Mother of Twins, by local residents in the 19th century. C.R. Conder and H.H. Kitchener of the Survey of Western Palestine carried out the first comprehensive study of the cave on October 17, 1873. They mapped out the cave and noted a deep pit at its northern end. Their description of the cave provided information about traditions and customs of the locals, who attributed healing properties to the spring water that flowed in the cave. In the late 1920s, René Neuville, the French consul in Jerusalem, excavated the floor of the cave's main chamber and found ceramic, wooden and stone vessels. The finds were dated to the Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods, the early Bronze, Middle Bronze and Iron Ages, and the Roman and Byzantine periods. From 1970 to 1974, Gideon Mann, a physician and cave explorer, studied the cave on behalf of the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. Mann mapped a section of the cave, found passages leading to inner hidden chambers, and discovered various items including pottery and glass vessels. Since 2009, the cave has been explored by the latest research team as a joint project of the Martin Zuz Department of Land of Israel Studies and Archaeology at Bar Ilan University and the Cave Research Center at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The paper added, beginning in the late 2nd century CE, the cave, especially its deep pit and interior spring, functioned as a place of devotion. In previous studies, we suggested that the cave was consecrated to a chthonic underworld deity. A large assemblage of oil lamps and coins from the late Roman period, as well as pottery and other items from the Byzantine period, was discovered in the main chamber and its ramifications. About 120 well-preserved oil lamps dating to the late Roman and early Byzantine periods, late 2nd to 4th centuries CE, were collected from cavities and crevices in the cave. The lamps had been deliberately deposited in narrow, deep crevices, most of them accessible only by difficult crawling. We had to use long poles with iron hooks to extricate many of them, and long poles had probably been used to insert them initially. The fact that these lamps had been thrust into and buried deep into these hidden, hard-to-reach crevices suggested that illuminating the dark cave was not their sole purpose. An assemblage of 4 ancient objects was found alongside 3 late Roman oil lamps in a very narrow crevice in the southern portion of Locus 3004. The assemblage, reachable only by stretching out a hand between the boulders, consists of 3 bronze objects, an intermediate Bronze Age axe and 2 socketed spearheads, and an early Bronze Age juglet. The question of how these 4 items ended up in the same narrow crevice together with 3 late Roman lamps, with no clear separation between the objects, is hard to answer. If the juglet is indeed from early Bronze I, then the assemblage is composed of items dating from 3 different periods. Since it is inconceivable that 3 deposits were independently placed in the same inaccessible crevice, we assume that the 4 ancient items were gathered and redeposited in the late Roman early Byzantine period, together with the oil lamps as part of cultic activity. The experts found that one of the cavities was a system of interconnected crevices located underneath large collapsed boulders in the centre of the entrance chamber. In one of its crevices, 5 late Roman, early Byzantine oil lamps deposited together with a Middle Bronze Age II bowl were found. 3 lamps were found underneath the bowl and 2 others were near it. The much older bowl seems to have been found elsewhere and intentionally deposited together with the lamps in late antiquity, and the finds took on a more sinister nature too. During the survey of the cave, 3 human craniums were found inside hard-to-reach crevices and beneath large rocks in the central chamber, near a large depression near to the entrance to the inner part of the cave and near the rock-cut pool. No additional human bones were found with the skulls. Because 2 of them were discovered in crevices and with no other finds nearby, the authors initially believed they had been moved there by rats after having originally been placed elsewhere. The 3rd skull was found in a hard-to-reach crevice covering 4 ceramic oil lamps of local types typical of the 3rd and 4th centuries CE. They say that this discovery supports the possibility that the cranium's location was not a coincidence. The bones and lamps seem to have been placed there together deliberately in one time period, namely the late Roman period, and to have served a single purpose for whoever placed them there. The paper continued, due to the archaeological context of the finds and their location inside the cave, we assume that the craniums were placed together with the oil lamps as part of a ritual of magic conducted in the cave in that period. Examination of both the written sources and the archaeological finds may indicate the type of ritual that took place in the cave, involving the use of hiding of human craniums, lamps and bowls together with metal weapons and other artifacts dating to much earlier periods. Identifying magical practices in the archaeological evidence is not simple. Magical practice is used in ritual acts that are undertaken mainly by individuals to achieve a desired effect. Sometimes the practices should be carried out in a specific location or require the use of specific material culture. Therefore, to locate magic in the archaeological context, we must trace material evidence for those practices. The paper cited the suggestion of Andrew Wilburn, who used the classical literary and documentary evidence to identify items that were frequently employed in magical rites. Among the material categories that are mentioned in the magical ancient sources, Wilburn noted usage of parts of human and animal bodies to establish a connection to the victim, and household items that have been repurposed for magical use. Detailing the use of human skulls for necromancy, the paper added, classical sources hardly mention the consecration or use of skulls at all, probably because they were used mostly for secret rites involving necromancy and communication with the dead, mainly by witches. These rites were usually conducted within tombs or burial caves, but sometimes they took place in a necromantion or necromantion, an oracle of the dead. These shrines were generally located in caves or next to water sources that were believed to be possible portals to the underworld. These caves were associated with legends concerning the descent of Persephone to the underworld or the rise of Kerberos from the underworld. They always included a shaft leading to the underworld through which the dead could rise. It added, necromancy was accepted in the Levant and the ancient East. There are many references to it in the Bible, such as the story of Saul having the prophet Samuel conjured up in En-Dor, 1 Samuel 28, 7-24. The act was viewed negatively as adoption of the customs of the surrounding nations and was therefore punishable by death. The practice is well documented in Mesopotamia, where cuneiform tablets from the 1st millennium BCE were found containing cultic texts detailing rituals for consulting with spirits by means of human skulls. One document mentions the participation of the sun god Shamash in the ritual, dust of the underworld. May he bring up a ghost from the darkness for me. May he put life back in the dead man's limbs. I call upon you, O skull of skulls. May he who is in the skull answer me, O Shamash who brings light in. References to necromancy also appear in Greek and Roman literary sources. The earliest such source is Homer's Odyssey, where the witch Circe helps Odysseus consult with the prophet Tiresias. In the Roman period, necromancy was viewed negatively and was sometimes associated with human sacrifice. Laws were passed against witchcraft, divination and human sacrifice in the imperial period and even earlier. In 97 BC, the Roman Senate outlawed human sacrifice. There is evidence, however, that the emperors Nero, Hadrian, Commodus, Caracalla and Elagabalus used necromancy to predict the future. and testimonies about the practice became more frequent beginning in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries AD. The article notes how Eusebius claimed that the Emperor Valerian was persuaded by an Egyptian sorcerer to slit children's throats, sacrifice children, and inquire of the entrails of newborns how to achieve prosperity and success. In AD 357, necromancy was outlawed conclusively by the Emperor Constantius II. A report on this law is preserved in the Codex Theodosianus and the Codex Justinianus. It prohibited all forms of divination, communication with demons, disturbance of the spirits of the dead, and nocturnal sacrifices. Ammianus Marcellinus reports that the punishment set for violators of the law was death. The law was prompted by the emperor's mounting fear that sorcery would be used against him. Literary sources from the 2nd through 5th century CE note the use of human skulls or heads in ceremonies conducted to raise the dead at oracles. Lucius Apuleius alludes to the use of skulls to raise the dead in his book Apologia, written in the mid-2nd century AD. It read, "But remember, it would be just as absurd to argue that obscenely named sea creatures are desired for sexual purposes as to say that one wanted a combfish to comb one's hair, a hawkfish to catch birds, a boarfish to hunt boar, sea skulls to raise the dead." In the 2nd to 3rd centuries AD, Philostratus mentioned that there was an oracle on the island of Lesbos where one could hear the prophecy of Orpheus from his severed head. And the oracle was apparently known throughout the region, all the way to Babylonia and Persia. According to the following passage, the worship of Orpheus's head took place in a shaft cave or underground chamber, for after the women had done their work, his head drifted to Lesbos, lodged in a chasm on Lesbos, and sang its prophecies in an earthen chamber. In the 3rd century AD, Christian theologian Hippolytus of Rome tried to discover the arcane knowledge behind the speaking skulls in the divination rituals. The paper mentions other uses of skulls for divination in disparate cultures from Celts, Canaanites, Thracians, Egyptians, Babylonians, ancient Britons, and more. Turning to the use of oil lamps, bowls, axes and bladed weapons in such rituals, the paper read, "Although oil lamps are utensils for everyday use in certain contexts, or if they are found in large quantities or in unexpected places, their function can be interpreted differently. Such conditions can indicate a ritual context for their deposition." The use of oil lamps for divination, Licnomancy and Lampadomancy, was extremely widespread in the classical periods. The prophetic force behind the lamp was believed to be the spirit or spirits, or in some cases even gods or demons. Divination by means of oil lamps was done by watching and interpreting the shapes created by the flame. A boy usually served as medium. It added daggers and swords too, such as the bronze daggers from the intermediate Bronze Age discovered together with late Roman oil lamps at Locus 3004 and Locus 3064 were associated with necromancy and divination. They served primarily to protect the believer from evil spirits and to ensure that offerings to the specific spirit being conjured up were not seized by other spirits. These offerings might include objects that were customarily given to spirits during funerals in antiquity. Accordingly, when Odysseus deposited an offering into the shaft of Tiresias, he had to wield his sword against other spirits. Silas Italicus reports that the Roman general Scipio Africanus, who finally defeated the Carthaginian commander Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC, went to a cave containing a portal to the underworld. There he encountered a Sibyl who asked him to dig a channel in the earth with his sword and instructed him to use his sword if unwanted spirits came towards him from the underworld. The paper's discussion section read, "The Teomim cave in the Jerusalem hills has all the cultic and physical elements necessary to serve as a possible portal to the underworld. It is a subterranean space with a deep shaft at one end. A spring flows in the cave, and its waters are collected in a rock-cut pool. There are traditions attributing powers of fertility and healing to the cave." Based on the discovery of oil lamps deposited in crevices throughout the cave, including near the spring pool and the deep shaft, we suggested previously that chthonic deities associated with the cycles of nature, life and death were worshipped in the cave in the late Roman period. We also showed that evidence of such a cult from the late Roman period is found at several additional sites throughout Judea. In this context, it is worth noting that a cultic site seems to have existed in the Grotto of the Nativity in Bethlehem from the time of Hadrian to the reign of Constantine. As the site was consecrated to the local god Tammuz Adonis, it seems that the cultic traditions and ceremonies practiced there were those of the eastern part of the empire and the Levant. Most of the objects discovered in hard-to-reach crevices in the Teomim cave, including the oil lamps, the ceramic and glass bowls and vessels, the axe head and the daggers, were used in one way or another for sorcery and magic in caves perceived as possible portals to the underworld. Their purpose was to predict the future and conjure up the spirits of the dead. It concluded, to sum up, the identification of the Teomim cave as a local oracle, Necromantion, and the analysis of the archaeological assemblage is, in our opinion, an outstanding test case worth examining within the developing discipline of the archaeology of magic. The findings and their specific archaeological context provide a better understanding of divination rites that were probably held in the cave and shed a more tangible light over the spells of the Greek and Demotic magical papyri. That's it for this video. Don't forget to like, share, and most importantly subscribe, and you can also support the channel on Subscribestar via the link in the description. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.